Good evening, Calvary Chapel.
Whether you are here or online, we're glad to have you with us for 1 Samuel chapter 20. Nice to have the Johnson clan back in the house tonight.
Yes.
It's not easy for you to get here. We appreciate it. It's good to see you.
I'll tell you what, I walked out in the foyer there and saw them brownies, and I thought, Lord, you are good.
You are good.
Never let me down.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, beauty's in now, beholder, and I'll be holding some of those brownies. 1 Samuel chapter 20. Kick us off there.
1 Samuel chapter 20. So you guys had a really good run through 19 last week, and this is really the kind of the direct continuation of that whole storyline right there. And so here we go. Let's start off with our summary. David flees from Naoth. Did you guys actually decide how to pronounce that last one?
I left it to Pete, didn't I?
And he seemed to sidestep it pretty quick.
He did.
Okay.
He ran it over. I'm just going now.
Naoth, okay. And he returns, I think he returns to Gibeah. It doesn't actually say, but since he meets Jonathan there, and it seems to be in the section where Saul lives and all that stuff, I'm going to say he went to Gibeah.
Okay.
Sometime later to speak with Jonathan, of whom he asked why his father Saul is trying to kill him. And David, in fact, has to put some effort into convincing Jonathan that his father is trying to bump him off. And Jonathan, still in some degree of disbelief, does make a covenant with David regarding the future and to help figure out if Saul truly wants to kill him so that David may get away. Taking advantage of an upcoming feast of the new moon, they devise a clever plan by which Jonathan, through the use of a servant fetching arrows that he is to shoot, could communicate secretly with David, ensuring the safety of both men through the process. David hides by the stone of Ezel under the guise of going back home to Bethlehem to feast with his family. And Saul notices his absence on the first day of the feast, but assumes he is absent because he had become ceremonially unclean somehow. But when David fails to show to the second day of the feast, Jonathan reports that he gave David permission to go to Bethlehem. Saul gets very angry and is appalled that Jonathan has apparently chosen to protect David, even though it would cost Jonathan the throne. And Saul orders Jonathan to send for David so that he can kill him. But Jonathan insists that David has done nothing, much less anything deserving of death. And this really burns Saul's whiskers, who grabs for a handy spear yet again. I would think somebody by this point in time would have stepped aside with those.
It's amazing. I just feel, you know how like some guitar players have like a rack of guitars, you know?
Yeah.
I feel like he just has a rack of spears. It's like,
It's his weapon.
like nobody even seems surprised by it.
Maybe he has like a holder in the throne.
Yeah, they just keep popping up.
There we go. And by this point, I wonder how many people he threw spears at that didn't make it. All right. This is evidently a fairly common thing because nobody seems to freak out about
It's
it.
also fairly common for intimates. Maybe there's that.
Yeah. True. Spear class.
Okay. So, and he tries to skewer his own son with the spear so as to kill him. And Jonathan leaves the feast justifiably angry and goes the next morning to the field to implement the arrow communication plan that they had devised. And after the servant serves his role, he is brought along so as to communicate to David that he needs to skedaddle, and he is sent back to the city. Jonathan can't help but stick around and say bye to his best friend, and they part ways. Fundamentally, I think this is a chapter about Jonathan more than anything, because we already know Saul's a whacknut. We've already seen David on the run. I think what this is really the coming to the knowledge of the situation of Jonathan. I think that's really what's happening here. So, main theme. What did we get for a main theme in here?
Josh?
Oh,
No,
where's
Josh?
Sheila?
Josh?
Why is Sheila not here?
I don't know.
She was supposed to represent.
Maybe
Tell us
she-
how many sections he
Maybe
has.
she's ceremonially unclean. I can only assume. She'll be here tomorrow.
We'll get angry tomorrow.
Throwing a spear at her if she's not here tomorrow.
Okay, so. what did
Jonathan realizes that his father's crazy.
That's good. I didn't realize I actually said kind of a main theme before I even asked. So, good job.
Basically was.
Yeah. Anybody else have anything interesting there?
Yeah, I went a little more like theological sounding, but it's the same thing.
Same thing. So we're going to handle this.
Well,
Yeah,
I
Rob.
think sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I saw like a beautiful like Frodo and Sam type friendship, and like Jonathan, I saw Jonathan as like the Sam who just believes the best of everybody, and it's just one is like, no, that can't possibly true. How could he hate you? How could he hate you? I mean, like you weren't like you look at what you've done for him,
Yeah.
you know. And I just see that kind of thing, and it's just like that he's absolutely crushed when he realizes that, oh, he wasn't paranoid. Okay.
Yeah.
You know, they say David, like, you know, I get why he's so worn down. He feels like he's been on the run. He's just his overactive imagination. But no, you know.
Yeah.
You know who
Absolutely.
Frodo and Sam were?
I no.
Okay. I didn't think so.
I did this a lot.
I understood. I got the message.
Interesting. Because I know this story well enough, I knew where she was going.
Ah,
But
yeah.
is that Lord of the Rings stuff?
Yes, good job.
And that's why you didn't understand. That's, you know, but it's okay. It's not because it was a bad analogy. It's just because.
We were talking about this Monday. I know this is crazy side step, I know. But Monday at Pastor's Prayer Meeting,
Yeah.
Chris Vanover in Nashville, his son Phil, they used to, like, they memorized that movie, the Lord of the Rings stuff.
Movies.
And the movies, trilogy, whatever. Trilogies, prequels, sequels, I don't know. I can't do all that stuff. But I've got a life. I don't know how many people know this stuff. But Philip, like,
It's nothing but a flesh wound.
I'm
Different
different.
movie.
Where's my spirit? So Philip memorized the whole the big opening monologue to the whole thing or whatever.
Yeah.
That said, but he did it in like a real southern accent. And I guess there's a recording of it somewhere. I keep trying to get it because Chris said it was just hilarious. You know?
Yeah.
It was like the Lord of them there rings. Okay, fix it.
What'd you have, Rob?
Well, when our loyalty is in God, He'll guide us through those conflicting demands of our relationships because
That's right.
he is going between his father and David at the same time.
Yep.
But he has God in the center of all that, ahead of all that.
I can't imagine what it would have been like for Jonathan if that were not the case. Because I don't think he ever felt like he chose sides. I think he felt like he chose God's side.
Mm-hmm.
And he navigated that as best he could.
Oh, that's terrible.
Oh, that's pretty good.
No. What has happened on my screen is the.
Oh, that's terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
I agree. It's terrible.
We're not going to be able to do it that way.
It's a good time to find that out.
It is, right before we get there.
It's handy.
So I did back up and do one kind of from David's perspective in this. So to highlight a time at which David's life changed just a great deal. This is kind of a crux point for what's going to happen in his life. To show how even a righteous man in the service of the Lord may have to walk a dark path to come to rely on God alone to be his defense, and to show how two brothers of heart and can be forced apart by circumstances beyond their control, but righteous love is not broken nor lost.
Okay. That's pretty good.
And I have to switch out of that, so I can hope to read that.
I kind of had a passing thought of how they may have been a little bit planning this, this little bit of an elaborate scheme sort of thing to figure out Saul. And what if David just showed up to dinner? What would have happened?
That's the part of it that you always have to wonder. What if?
Because
what if-
David and Goliath, no problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Then became
Exactly.
these
So why the
swords,
why the scheming?
Right.
Yeah. What got David so anxiety ridden over this?
Because he kind of probably feels like Saul can only be unlucky so many times.
Maybe.
You know what I mean? And it's just like this relentless, like he's continually over and over again. Like how many times is he gonna miss?
But so far, it's every time.
Well,
Yeah.
here's directly, David is allowed to fight Goliath. He's not allowed to fight Saul.
That's
He's
true.
the
Right.
anointed.
Right.
He's not allowed to do anything.
Yeah,
in
it
that
is a
situation.
confrontation of some kind.
Yeah, and so you can see that. But
I'm sort of thinking that
my
this-
argument is the reason why this worked out this way is because it's the way God wanted it to work out, and I think the spirit moving on David created this situation so that Jonathan could have peace in what was fixing to happen. I think this whole thing is so that Jonathan can really see what is going on.
I feel that, yeah, so that would have happened anyways, I believe. But I'm just wondering if this part of the character flaw in David that sort of led to the Bathsheba event, that's sort of like...
Well, yeah, he's human.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's all.
we can bat with that.
But it comes down to what we're always talking about. Did God plan it this way, or did God use this to David's advantage? Because this is the beginning of David's, running through the hillside being chased by Saul and all his guys, which is where he got his mighty men and where he learned how to lead in that kind of context and really be the guy.
I think I could use it, right? Any situation, God
Absolutely.
can use it. So
Yeah.
if you went to dinner and something broke out and you defeated Saul for sure, right, it would have been used also.
I mean, and as we read through the Psalms, David had some stuff to work out, right? He needed to have his edges filed off. And God is using this time in his life to file those edges off. So I think David had to go into the wilderness. And this is the thing that got him out. And I think part of the problem is Jonathan would have followed him if it hadn't been for this. Yeah, I think Jonathan would have gone after him.
Yep.
And brought him back or whatever, maybe joined him or something like that. And I don't think that's what God wanted to work out in that. That's what I think.
I totally agree with that on the Jonathan part.
Okay.
From the perspective of the Jonathan story, he needed to come to a crossroads where he understood the real situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because he really didn't before.
Yeah.
And no reason that he would have. I mean, it's just in the previous chapter where he goes and talks to his dad and
His
says,
dad relents.
and his dad relents and says, I will, doesn't he say something about, I will, as the Lord lives, he shall not be killed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So-
He basically swears by the Lord that he won't kill David.
Yeah, and so Jonathan being a righteous, godly kind of guy, actually that's one of the things I put in my notes in that verse. It reminds me of our New Testament calling to be grounded in love, and one of the characteristics of love is it hopes all things. So I think that's who Jonathan was, and he had to see reality, and this is about as gentle a way as he could see it, outside of the spirit.
Minus the spirit.
Minus the spirit.
This was kind of the best case scenario,
Mhm.
I think, for Jonathan.
Because it also didn't back Jonathan into a corner.
That's right.
So, Jonathan wasn't forced to strike out against Saul.
Well, and interestingly, even when he knew the truth, he didn't.
Exactly.
He didn't leave with David,
Yeah.
which was just very interesting.
He did get his spear chucked at him, but
But but that's my point. He stayed. He still stayed to serve his dad. He's killed in battle later.
I think he had the same understanding David did,
Yeah.
in that Saul
Still king.
was still king
Yep.
until God came along and removed him,
Mhm.
or directly told one of them to remove him.
Yeah.
And I think they were waiting for a direct word.
Mhm.
Now, I think David would not have been shocked if God had come and said, hey, it's time. This is how this is going to work out. Bang, bang, bang. Let's go. But it never worked out that way. Before we get too far down the rabbit hole, hold on one second. We decided to work this chapter a little bit differently because we have our sections, and we'll go through that as soon as Ron gets done talking. We weren't drawn to any particular section to talk about because this is a very linear, well-told story. It fills out all the details. There's nothing that's I think really deep in a lot of this. I think a lot of what is to be mined here is fairly well on the surface. There's a few interesting details in there, and we'll go through some of the verses throughout, but we didn't have a direct section to lock in on this time, which is very unusual because usually I have multiple sections to choose from to lock into instead of wondering what in the world I'm going to talk about.
I did run across something today, just actually kind of accidentally, a Spurgeon thing that I want to end. I need a couple minutes at the end. I want to end with. Is there something that he really fleshes out well about the chapter?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And its theme that I think would be a great stopping point for us when we get there.
Certainly. Ron.
It's just interesting in how far down Saul's gotten. He's not even, well, we know he's not listening to the Lord, but he's attacking the Lord's anointed in David, where David coming up won't do that because he has too much respect for
Well, and
the
look,
Lord
he
wants.
just says to his son here when he sticks up for him, why are you taking up for that guy? As long as he lives, you'll never have the throne. And then he tries to kill Jonathan for taking up for him. Like he's just out there, man.
Getting ahead of us.
I am. That's pretty far down the list.
That is, yeah. All right, so let's talk sections. How many sections did you get?
I actually got 6.
6.
I did.
Well, I was worried about my 5.
I didn't know where to find.
I
You
had
got
5.
5.
I have
I did 6. I was going to split it into 7, but
Oh.
My first section was really, really long.
What'd you get?
well, that's the hard thing about it.
7. Okay.
You know,
But here's how I divided it up, and then you can argue with me as we go. So I did verses 1 through 4, basically David testing Jonathan. And then the section 2, devising of the plan of arrows and the new moon festival, verses 5 through 23. I kind of lumped all that together.
wow.
Oh, wow.
You guys tell me I get too divisive on that. I'm trying not to do that. The section 3, David fails to show up at the feast, so Saul can kill him, verses 24 through 29. And then section 4, Saul's hair catches fire again, and he tries to skewer his own son for choosing David, verse 30 through 34. And then 5, I just did the whole section, the parting of true brothers in God, verse 35 through 42.
That one we agreed on.
Sweet. Sweet. Dialed it in at the very end. So, let's kind of, what I kind of thought we'd do is we'd run through each section, basically, and kind of hit some highlight points in there. So, section 1, the testing of Jonathan. So David basically comes back, meets up with Jonathan, and he says there in verse, oh shoot, that's not what that verse is. That's something there. Yada, 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 yada. So, he went and said to Jonathan, "What have I done? What is my iniquity? And what is my sin before your father that he seats my life?" And he asked Jonathan directly what his sin is. He doesn't say, "What does Saul think my sin is?" He says, "Well, what do you think my sin is?" And I think what he's doing here is he's meeting up with what he knows is his genuine covenant of friend in God, right? And a true brother. And he's testing him in the moment to see if he has been poisoned by Saul in this against him a bit. And I really think it's a bit of a perspective check. Just double check, see how bad things have gone. And it happens right there off the top. And you look like you have a slightly different perspective of it.
Well, as soon as you said that, I saw where that does make sense. I did have a different take on it, but I can't disagree with you, Steve. Because later it's obvious that David isn't sure where Jonathan is.
Yeah.
Because he continues questioning about
he keeps asking that.
So I get that. My first take on it was that the wise are always seeking wisdom, and they want to know if they are wrong. I felt like it may have been an honest question. Hey, am I doing something wrong? Am I missing something?
And that's a viable point there too. And I think both those can be answered at the same time. It's still a wise question to a brother in Christ.
Yeah.
And it also seeks to be informative of where he stands.
Yeah, and so my application from that viewpoint was, let's make sure we are asking questions of those that we respect to see if we're in agreement on things or not.
Yeah.
And we need to flesh out things.
Yeah.
Hey, how do you think I'm doing?
Yeah. And then we basically find out here, Jonathan says, "By no means, you shall not die. Indeed, my father will do nothing, neither great or small, without first telling me. And why should my father hide this thing from me? It is not so." So here I think we get the first real understanding of Jonathan and his love for his father. And they obviously have a tight relationship.
Mhm.
I think this is kind of a really good indicator here of just how tight Jonathan and Saul have been in the past, because he acts like they talk about everything. And we get the obvious understanding here that Jonathan doesn't know that Saul was out to get David at Naioth.
Yeah, I think that's true. He doesn't seem to have any awareness of that whatsoever.
Yeah, which I think is the first time that Jonathan at least understands that there's been a separation, on down. But here he obviously doesn't have that understanding,
And David doesn't feel the need to bring it up.
which is really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is, kind of a heartfelt issue.
Yeah.
He doesn't seek to crush him and prove his point.
Yep.
He just basically asked him to serve him in this one thing.
Really quick,
Yeah.
isn't it interesting how David is asking the question, what have I done that Saul wants to kill me? Well, obviously made him very jealous, and he hasn't had the introspection to kind of figure that out, it seems. It's like David is doing what he's supposed to do. He's supposed to be a great warrior for the king, but it's also causing him to be jealous, and maybe David's not thinking of that at all.
That's possible. That's perfectly possible. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, it's quite possible that David is being
Another
ignorant
character
in
flaw,
that
right.
line.
Humble enough that he still doesn't think of himself as anything. And so.
Well, we know that's quite a bit of reality there.
Yeah, and so maybe it doesn't even register with him when the people are singing songs about him and slighting Saul.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's pretty
what
good point.
it is, right?
Yeah. He probably perceives it to some degree as the glory moving upward,
Yeah, it's just
going up the
oblivious
chain.
to how it might be
Yeah.
affecting people
Yeah,
around.
that's a valid point, I think.
That
So,
makes sense because, we were talking, was it last week, about how he's still staying there and playing the harp and all that, even though there's all this aggression against him. And then I hadn't thought about him not complaining to Jonathan that, look what they just tried to do.
Yeah.
Like, all of this is like, it's just what you do in the ministry.
Just
there's a good poster right there.
I'm taking arrows.
As you're
There'll be
dodging
two spears in the
spears.
wall. This is how ministry works.
Welcome to the ministry. Coat hooks.
So
Yeah,
that's where
yeah.
that circus act came from.
Huh?
That's where the circus act came from.
That's it.
There you go. So, Jonathan also, in his position here, he doesn't take sides as well in this. He doesn't side with his father against David. Okay, he doesn't side with David against his father. He says, "Hey, let's figure this out. Let's do the test and see what reality is, and then we'll decide what's happening from that point on." So I think he's hoping that David is wrong about Saul, but he's willing to also proceed in caution as if it were true. And I think that has some ministry application.
And that's also in, from the other chapter when him and his servant went up to go battle the Philistines. He said, if they do this one thing, then we'll know not to, or if they do this other thing, then we know we can go over there and take them. He was doing the same thing with his father, but just by talking to him.
Yep.
And he knows who David is.
Mm-hmm.
He knows that David's the anointed king. And he knows that David is a follower of the one true God, just as much as he is. Because these guys are about as close to soulmates as you can get. And he'll do whatever it takes to settle the heart of the matter for his brother in that. So I think he's really seeking to give peace to David, even though he thinks he already knows what the answer is.
This is what I love. They actually, neither one of them truly contradict the other to the extent, to this extent. I think it's obvious from what we were just talking about. David sees that he doesn't know how aggressive his dad is towards him. He probably doesn't know anything about the previous situation that just happened. And he feels no need to put that burden on Jonathan. In the same way, Jonathan disagrees with him about his assessment, of Saul. But when he sees the kind of mental state that David's in, I feel like David's a little, what would the word be? He's a little flustered right now.
He's very flustered.
I think. And when Jonathan sees that, he gives his initial disagreement of the assessment. But when that doesn't back David down, he doesn't continue.
Yeah.
He says, "Okay, I'll do whatever you ask me to do." Like they're very gracious to each other.
It's immediate. I think the crux of that is at the end of verse 3 here. I think this is what settles that, where David's talking and he says, "But truly as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, there is but a step between me and death." I think David was obviously afraid. He was in fear of his life. He had come to that point, and justifiably so, because Saul had tried to make a pincushion him a couple times. He was chasing him around a bit.
Except he has the prophecy.
That's
how flustered he is.
Yeah.
Because David's not a get flustered kind of guy.
He's not.
Joe.
Yeah.
This is the first time we've seen that from him.
Mm-hmm.
That was
And-
my application for like that little part, that you cling to what you know the Lord has told you,
Yeah.
no matter what
Yeah.
this looks or feels like.
Freedom in Christ. You let what is true determine your feelings. You don't let how you feel determine what is true.
So, what Jonathan does not do is chastise him for a lack of faith
Yep.
in that prophecy, but rather he seeks to comfort his friend and to help him find the truth about his fears. And he reacts with love and understanding and the will to help. But not just help in his own way, but to do what David thinks should be done to flesh out the truth.
Mm-hmm.
He listens, which I think is just a magical thing.
Yeah.
One thing we do know about David is David's not a very patient man, really. David's an active guy. He's doing things. And he's fixing to enter a time period in his life that builds great patience. And I think it starts here. So that's kind of what I had for section 1. Anybody else have anything to say on that? Moving on, section 2, the big boy, verses 5 through 23. Just hit some high points here. So David has a plan to test the heart of the king at the new moon 3-day feast. I think that literally just is what it is. There was effectively this feast that the court would hold, kind of all the leaders get together. There were several things to do in the new moon cycle, sacrifices and stuff that were to be made and stuff. So it was a good time to gather everybody together, and Saul would have expected everybody to show up at this feast. So David, though here he retests the heart of Jonathan again, stating that he should go ahead and just kill him rather than to plan to hand him over to Saul. So kind of this secondary thing, and I don't know if it's because of verse 2, that reaction that he had, that he kind of lashes a little bit here in the intensity. This is a fairly intense little stretch here.
It's a little Saul-like.
He's
He's anxious to the point that he's not sure if he can trust Jonathan, I think. Just for a second.
Yeah.
And listen, that's something to keep in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Like, listen, David is as full of faith as it comes, and he's as level-headed as it comes for being a young man like he is. And yet he's so rattled at this point that he's looking at the guy, the one guy in the world he can trust more than anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And he's not sure.
It's kind of like that scene in Lord of the Rings with Sam and Frodo. I'm just saying.
Give me the ring.
Interesting.
Okay, moving on.
Got mad at Sam, snapped at Sam.
So what's interesting here too is Jonathan is very patient with David in this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he sees, like you said, that David is so rattled.
Yeah.
And I think it's an aspect of David that he hasn't really encountered before. And he's just really trying to bring him back down.
He's ministering to David.
This stuff. He is
Yeah.
very much so. And he's
Make sure you've got people in your life that will do that.
he is still upholding the covenant of true friendship between them, even when David is unsure and afraid.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's an important point too. The testing of the covenant did not weaken it.
Mm.
And I think that's very important because all covenants will be tested where they aren't needed.
Mm.
Okay.
Listen, married folks.
Yes, very much so.
There's a good point there.
Yeah. So we too should be calm and patient with dealing with our brothers and sisters and not angry when they test our love for them and our heart for the work of the Lord. I take this one pretty close. I can be kind of intense about stuff.
What?
Yeah. So I'm working on this one.
This is my shock face.
That's what Frodo did. So essentially here too is David doesn't have the whole plan worked out in this. So he has like the first part of the plan, but then he's like, well, how are you going to tell me? What's going to happen now? And Jonathan just steps right in with this relatively brilliant plan that protects the both of them. So David never has to reveal himself, and Jonathan never has to reveal his communication. Okay, and it really is one of those God-level thought processes in the nature of it. And Jonathan knows that in the end, David will be king of Israel, and the new regime usually wipes out the old regime. But Jonathan calls upon the nature of their original covenant of friendship and asks David to ensure that when he comes to power, his family is not removed, that they are preserved with the same love and loyalty that he shows to Jonathan, which is exactly what happens in the future. That's in 2 Samuel. Are we doing 2 Samuel after this? We just stepping
Yes.
forward? Okay, figures. So Jonathan knows that if Saul is in fact bent on killing David, that David will have to leave. Thus, this might be the last time they get to see each other. Okay, so this is an important time to make this covenant of the future here, because they might not get to do this again. And he wants David's vow that he will look after his descendants and preserve his house into the future. Jonathan knows what is at stake, and this is where I'm really sure that Jonathan knows exactly that David is the anointed king, because he sees it coming. So that was kind of my run through on that section. Anything else in there?
How far did that get you to 23?
No. I'm sitting on 24.
Okay, no.
And this section's kind of short, really, the verses 24 through 29. So we start the Feast of the New Moon. I think it's interesting that Saul is on the lookout specifically for David. And I think he's waiting for this Feast of the New Moon to come about, because he knows that David should show up to this. I think that he believes that David has such loyalty to the court and to him that he can use this to entrap and murder him. I really think that's what his thought process is at this point in time.
Could be.
He convinces himself that David's absence is due to some breaking of a cleanliness law, which can only last a day. So thus, he's not here. Perhaps he has touched a dead body or whatever, and he's unclean for today, but that only lasts a day. He'll show up tomorrow. Then we can have our pincushion time, and we can try again. So Saul could have easily asked after David at this point in time, and I find it interesting that he didn't. I think he was concerned that word would get back to David if he was looking for him. I think that's how paranoid he is too.
Maybe. I think he's also trying to still portray himself as a legitimate leader for his people. Because he's got Abner and those guys there. He can't seem rattled.
Yeah, true. He's got to make it look good. So Saul comes around the second day, which is really kind of in my next section. That's really kind of the end point of that section. I start back again at verses 30 through 34. When on day 2, Saul speaks up about David's absence, And it's interesting to me here that we get the notion that he asked Jonathan directly about where he was. He knew to turn to who to ask about where David was and what he was supposed to be doing. Jonathan very reasonably explains David's absence, initiating stage 2 of their master plan. But Saul is instantly enraged about this, and effectively swearing at him that it would have been better that he had not been born than to side with David against him and himself. This thing that he said, and remember, this is like the feast. We don't get the impression that he pulled Jonathan aside here. Like, this is out in front of everybody. Okay, Saul really has lost it at this point. And the mind of those that are in thoughts of evil can only see evil in the actions of those around them.
You got bad eyes.
Exactly. This brought me immediately back, it's in my notes here, to the Sunday, where it's your lamp is shining darkness, then the world is a dark place.
Yep.
To sum that up. And everything about Saul is shining the wrong kind of light here.
Yep. So what's our application for that? We need to know that. What do we need to do with it? What is the purpose of us understanding how the ungodly go through the world?
So we're not surprised by it, and we can be on guard for it.
We should
Because we
never
have to-
expect the ungodly to act righteously.
That's it. Like, and like, so when, and that just helps us to know that, like, when people are lashing out and they're acting like completely unhinged, that it is the Jesus in us that is causing it, or it's just the fact that they are just so lost that they don't even realize.
That's right.
And so, like, it's an insulation, like, a protective, can protect our hearts.
Insulation's a
protect
good
our-
word.
Yeah. I always liken this to a scared dog.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
You cannot be surprised when a scared dog bites you.
that's right.
And you just can't be shocked by it. It is what it is. And to me, it's the same kind of construct. I actually have a quote written in here. I think it's from Oscar Wilde. Bitter is the root of betrayal of oneself that stains the heart and poisons the mind. Saul openly declares before the court his intent to kill David.
Do you think really quick that Jonathan holding off about the explanation of where David was till Saul said, "Hey, where the heck's David?" Instead of Jonathan actually telling him up front, "Hey, he's not going to make these feasts."
Well, that was part of the plan. David wanted to know if Saul would even notice that he wasn't there.
Oh,
that
okay,
was,
okay.
Yeah, there was this thing. Let's see if he notices I'm not there.
Gotcha.
So when he asked you, he actually specifically says, if he asked you where I
But
am,
from
tell
Saul's
him this.
perspective, as the father, if Jonathan knew that, he probably would, by him not saying anything until he asked, probably really.
I'm sure it added to his anger.
Yeah.
Probably did. So the interesting thing is too, is I got thinking about how open this is and how esteemed David is in the eyes of the servants of Saul. So everybody in that room, we basically get the impression, is a real big fan of David. And Saul openly declares, go get him, bring him here so that I can kill him. And I think this is probably a turning point for a lot of people in that room at that point in time.
Which is rough for Saul, because it's another like 15 years
Yeah,
before David becomes king.
yeah. I bet they don't treat him nicely. He doesn't get warmed up shoes.
Wonder if he ever ran out of spears.
Have another spear!
No!
You keep
So-
them all.
What's interesting too here is Jonathan refuses the direct order of his king. Basically rebellion against the earthly king to be in submission to the heavenly king. And we've talked about this, about following the rule of law and things like that until it asks you to do something that is against God. And that's a very important line here. And Jonathan really establishes the line here. He not only declares open defiance against his father, but he upholds righteousness in pointing out that Saul has no cause against David. And Jonathan didn't just say no, but challenged the lies and the sinful heart of his father before the entire court, which I think goes a lot to why Saul really got angry here.
Oh, yeah, back somebody into a corner who doesn't have a real answer, and
Yeah.
that sets him off.
Yeah.
But knowing Jonathan the way we do, I bet he asked it respectfully. Like, hey, give me your evidence.
Yeah, but, yeah.
You know? Like he gave Saul an opportunity to prove his point.
I'm not sure how calm Jonathan would have been at this point.
Well, it doesn't say that he's
the-
angry until after.
I understand, but the veil really just got torn away.
Yeah. But we know Jonathan. He is the peacemaker.
He is.
I'll give you
that.
He is very optimistic. Always. Until he can't be.
Yeah, which I
Yeah, I
think
bet
just-
he's
I
like
think
kind of
that-
hoping like, well, maybe if we just talk it out, he'll realize he's being crazy. And you're just like, David's a good guy. Like,
Yeah.
why? I mean,
It worked last time.
Yeah,
It worked in chapter 19.
right.
Okay. I'll let that be. That's fine. I don't have anything against that. What I do like about this is Jonathan stands for the righteous position against all odds.
That's right.
Because he also has to know of his father's proclivity and the very close spear that I think this was like a scepter for him. He just hauled it around. He probably had a couple of favorites and rubbed them or something. I don't know. He was a real big fan of these spears. But in application for us, how does that work? Do we see any delineation of application for such activity in those odds?
Well, from that section, with what Saul said, it was like Jonathan's not being ambitious enough because he could be the king and you're kind of protecting and it's getting in the way of you. So, you
Satan right
what?
He said that reminds me of Satan.
there. I wanted to put that out there because that just occurred to me, and then I didn't want to lose it in your next thought. That's all. That's why I kind of whispered it to him a little bit.
Keep focused on whatever, like, I guess my theme is just don't be swayed from whatever the Lord is, because I didn't realize I put it in two different sections, but especially the things of this world, power and fame and money.
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't matter if the Lord told you something different.
That's right.
Yeah.
Jonathan knows what is true. And he will do everything that he can to help others get to that same point. But he will not stray from it. He will not work against it in any way. It's a rare commodity.
And to the point, like I was saying, it reminds me of Satan and the tempting of Christ, and that he's basically saying, look, I can give you the throne if you give me David.
Mm-hmm.
Because as long as David's alive, you can't sit here. And Jonathan goes, no.
Mm-hmm. And this is, I know we're not technically there yet, but he says no, and he goes and warns David, and then he goes back and serves. Still.
Yeah, he does.
He still goes back and serves the king.
Yeah. Kind of like when David returns the second time to have another
Absolutely.
spear thrown at him.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
really that he is in the service that he's called to. Just because it's hard, he doesn't get to leave the ministry that he's in.
Yep,
Right.
that's right.
He has to keep walking the walk. So we might as well bounce forward. We got a couple minutes here. You guys set this real good standard of being done on time. Verses 35 through 42 real quick. So Jonathan initiates, he goes and he takes the lad out to the field, shoots some arrows. He says, hey, that arrow's way past you. And by the way, be in a hurry.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is really bad.
He reasoned
And I'm sure the lad's like, man, I know who his dad is with the spears. I better get some arrows. So he's running around afraid of getting shot, I'm sure. But what I do like here is it really shows the true heart of Jonathan, because I think in the first interaction with David, Jonathan really felt that Saul was not out to kill David. And I think he felt that in his heart. And I think he felt that there would be reunion.
Yeah.
And when it broke him and he understood that they would not be around each other anymore, he could not stick with the plan. Because the boy comes back with the arrows, and he hands him his bow and whatever else he's got, and says, why don't you head back to town? I'm going to hang out here and watch the deer or something. I don't know. But then what's interesting here too is that David is waiting at the rock of Ezel. Did anybody get a reference for what that means?
I didn't know.
It's the rock of departure. He has to wait for the third day at the rock of departure before he leaves.
Not a Frodo reference.
Yeah.
True, not a photo reference. And I think that in of itself says, a lot about the hand of God in the situation. But the heart of Jonathan, I think he's absolutely broken at this point, and he realizes the true nature of what's fixing to happen, and that David has to leave, and they will probably never see each other again.
Yeah.
They do see each other, but basically right before Jonathan dies. It goes that far. So they have this embrace, and David shows him a great deal of respect in the work that Jonathan has done for him, and the bowing, and then they hug, they talk it out for a bit, I'm assuming, and then he tells David he's got to go, and it says that David was worse than Jonathan in this moment, and I think there's a good reason for that, in that Jonathan was losing David, but David was not only losing Jonathan, and that interaction with, frankly, the only person he could trust. He was also losing any sense of home, and he no longer had a roof over his head, and that provision and people and all that stuff. David lost a lot in this moment. Now, we know how the story ends and all that stuff, but you got to remember that when you get thrown into the dark pit with the lions, it still looks really dark, and there's still a bunch of lions around roaring at you really loud. And I think that's where David is in this moment, which I think is bringing him to the end of himself, so that God can do everything that he needs to do for him. That's what I've got.
Okay, let me finish with this Spurgeon thing that I found today. Who will tell me if your father answers you harshly? David said. It was not an unlikely thing that his father would answer Jonathan roughly. Saul had taken great offense against David, while Jonathan, his eldest son, on the contrary, loved David as his own soul. Jonathan could hardly think that his father really meant harm to so good a man as David. And he expressed to David that opinion. And then David, to be prepared for the worst, asked him this question: what if your father answers you roughly? It did so happen. Saul answered his son with bitter words, and in the desperation of his anger, he even hurled a javelin at him. Yet Jonathan did not forsake David. He clung to him with all the faithfulness of love, and until his death, which was much mourned by David, he remained his fast and faithful friend. Now, this question of David to Jonathan is one which we should put to all believers in Christ, especially to the younger ones who have lately entered into covenant with the great Son of David, and who, in the ardor of their hearts, feel that they could live and die for him. They will meet with opposition from their dearest friends. Perhaps their father, brother, husband, or uncle will answer them roughly, or perhaps their mother, wife, or sister will become a persecutor to them. What then? What will they do under such circumstances? Will they follow the Lord through evil report? What if your father answers you roughly? Remember that this supposition is a likely one. There are a few Christians so blessed that all their friends accompany them in the pilgrimage to heaven. What advances they ought to make in the sacred journey. What excellent Christians they ought to be. They are like plants in a conservatory. They ought to grow and bring forth the loveliest flowers of divine grace, but few are in that situation. The large proportion of Christians find themselves opposed by those of their own family, or by those with whom they work or live. Is it not likely to be so? Was it not so from the beginning? Is there not hostility between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman? Did Cain not slay his brother Abel because he was accepted by the Lord? In the family of Abraham, was there not an Ishmael born after the flesh who persecuted Isaac, who was born after the Spirit? Was not Joseph hated by his brothers? Was not David persecuted by Saul, Daniel by the Persian princes, and Jeremiah by the kings of Israel? Has it not always been so? Did not the Lord Jesus Christ himself meet with slander, cruelty, and death? And did he not tell us that we must not look for favor where he found rejection? He said plainly, I came not to send peace on the earth, but a sword. And he declared that the immediate result of preaching the gospel would be to set the Son against the Father, and the Father against the Son, so that a man's foes should be of his own household. There's the theme for the chapter. Find out what is true, choose to believe it, and you act like you believe it, no matter what. And it's going to hurt sometimes. You're going to get hurt by people that you love very much. We don't give up on them. We never give up on them. We don't repay evil for evil. We get all of our solace from Jesus Christ. Jonathan's conscience was clear at the end of the day. And I bet he died with a clear conscience. And I bet he was okay. Saul never had a day of peace from that moment forward. Find out what is true. Choose to believe it. Act like you believe it. Amen?
Amen.
All right, we're late again. Lord, thank you for tonight. Thank you for this message. Thank you for this wonderful story of Jonathan and David. Lord, what a pure brotherly love they had for one another, rooted in their faith in you, their desire to serve you and to see victories for your wonderful, powerful name. Lord, it's a beautiful story, and we would love to see it play out where they could just serve together and slay giants and defeat armies for your glory together. But that was not the plan. That was not what you had in store. David has to go off and sojourn and be trimmed up and tried and tested and manicured before he can assume the role that you have for him. And Jonathan has his role to play in Saul's presence, and we don't know most of what the rest of that is, but I know you blessed him somehow, Lord, because he was yours, and he held on to truth no matter what. May we always do the same. If we are put in a position where we have to choose between an earthly relationship with someone that we love with all our heart, may we love you more. And Lord, those are hard words to say, but it's a path that you've had me walk more than once. And I've had to choose you over others sometimes. Not that I have rejected them, but I've had to align myself with you. And I know that there's peace there. I know that there's comfort there, because that's the kind of God you are. And so I know the exhortation of Scripture is what is best for us when you warn us that you came not to bring peace, but a sword. And that often cuts relationships to the quick. Lord, may we be found faithful when it's time to stand before you. May we be found to have represented you well and done right when everybody else was doing wrong. Lord, may we not treat people the way they treat us. May we treat them the way you have called us to treat them. And may you be glorified. It's in Jesus' name. God's people said, Amen. Love you all. Zoom meeting is about to start. If you have the link for that and you're online, please join us for the prayer meeting. If not, we'll see you Sunday. But until then,
Love God, love everybody else.
Amen.